The bright side of addiction is recovery. In this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, we discuss what happens when an addiction counselor who is in recovery has a relapse. Should they be fired? Should they be treated? What should they do? Who heals the healer? We will head down to Texas and discuss this important issue with the CEO of Summer Sky Treatment Center. Great program down in Stephenville, Texas. That's just outside of Fort Worth. Scott is also the former president of the Texas Association of Addiction Professionals and also a person in long-term recovery. Scott is devoting a great deal of his time these days to an organization called TAPNET. It's a peer assistance program designed to assist chemical dependency counselors struggling with addiction and mental health disorders in returning to healthy functioning so they may safely continue their practice. The philosophy of the TAPNET program is that addiction and mental illness are chronic illnesses and relapse may occur. It is the profession's responsibility to protect the clients and support the rehabilitation of the impaired professional. It's all about healing the healers. And Dick Van Dyke, who has decades in long-term recovery, he's going to share his thoughts and reflections on people, places, and things. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast, spell it out, .org. That's recoverycoasttocoast.org. And, following 15 years of doing nightly broadcasts on iHeartRadio here in Seattle, we have now upgraded to a national podcast. And it's available to anyone at any time, featuring interviews with clinicians, authors, recovering celebrities, and everyday people in long-term recovery, plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy the podcast and share it with your friends as well. Recovery is as recovery does. And by the way, we would love to hear from you. Send us an email when you get a chance, would you? recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Let us know your thoughts about the podcast, and perhaps you have a subject or maybe a guest you'd like to suggest. Again, our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch. They're one of the oldest and most successful treatment programs and affordable addiction treatment centers in the United States, having successfully treated well over 200,000 adolescents, adults, and family members for the past 50-plus years. It's where recovery becomes reality. And over the years, I have referred countless individuals to Sundown with really good success. They're nationally recognized for their quality programs and professional caregivers, many of whom went through Sundown themselves. They are 12-step centered, and they have a multidisciplinary team of certified counselors and top medical professionals. Residential treatment allows individuals to focus on treatment and healing and recovery and to learn new skills in a supportive community environment. And it gives family members a chance to participate in their comprehensive family program, one of the best around. Sundown is a not-for-profit program. They have their own land that they purchased years and years and years ago at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River Canyon, which brings about reflection and serenity. Now, if you're looking for a treatment program, certainly do your research. A lot of good programs out there. But definitely check out Sundown M Ranch. They are in Central Washington State. Check out their website, good website, easy to remember, sundown.org. The road to recovery begins at Sundown M Ranch. All right, let's meet Scott Kelley. I've known Scott for many years, and he is as solid as they come. He's one of the most respected addiction professionals in the state of Texas. We spoke at length by phone about the robust Texas Peer Assistance Program. You can't give away what you don't have. Now, you may have heard this in the rooms. Your own health, your own recovery must come first. I spoke at a conference a few years ago and I gave away some buttons that I had designed that said recovery first. Even on an airline flight, they always tell you in the event of an emergency, put your mask on first, then help others. You got to take care of yourself. And this is especially true of those who are in the helping and healing professions, including doctors, nurses, and yes, addiction treatment counselors. Now, on this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, we're going to focus on healing the healers. For decades, treatment centers around the country have been the gateway to long term recovery. And these wonderful treatment centers are staffed with some incredible, highly educated, highly trained professionals. Many of these professionals are themselves in long term recovery. A lot of them with 10, 20, 30 years or more of personal recovery from addiction. Many are sadly underpaid, overworked, and certainly highly stressed due to the nature of people struggling with active alcohol and other drug addictions, as well as mental illness. And make no mistake about it, it's a tough damn job. And we owe all of them a tremendous debt of gratitude. These professionals are human beings, subject to the same conditions all of us have to deal with. They often suffer from burnout and worse. Some of them relapse. It's just a fact. Now, should they be fired? Banned from ever working in the field of addiction? Where is the compassion? Who heals the healers? And who protects the healers after they renew their recovery? And then when they return to work, what safeguards are put into place to assure that the patients are not in danger? Well, in the great state of Texas, TAP, the Texas Association of Addiction Professionals, has made this a top priority issue. They instituted a peer assistance program. They formed a new nonprofit organization called TAPNET, the Texas Addiction Professionals Peer Assistance Network. Scott Kelley is an addiction professional who has made the peer assistance program a high priority. He's the CEO of Summer Sky Treatment Program in Stephenville, Texas, right near Fort Worth. They've treated nearly 20,000 patients over the last 35 plus years. Scott, who is a person in long term recovery, is also the past president of the Texas Association of Addiction Treatment Professionals. And back in 2013, he was given the prestigious Terry Hall Texas Addiction Professional of the Year Award. And a year later, he received the coveted Mel Schulstadt NADAC Professional of the Year Award. NADAC is the National Association for Addiction Professionals. Mel was the founder of NADAC. Scott now joins us by phone for a few minutes to talk about healing the healers, treating those professionals who suffer a relapse. What happens in Texas when an addiction or mental health treatment provider needs help? Scott, welcome back to Recovery Coast to Coast, and give us, if you would, an overview of the TAPNET program, the Texas Addiction Professionals Peer Assistance Program.
Yeah, Neil, Texas Association Addiction Professionals Network, it's a peer network for counselors, students entering into the recovery field that are fixing to be counselors, and it's also available for licensed professional counselors and licensed chemical dependency counselors, and pretty much most of the Texas certifications that are offered in the state of Texas, and also peer recovery coaches and stuff of that nature, also peer recovery specialists. And what it is it's one way to intervene upon an impaired professional who is working in the field in one of those capacities to help them get back onto the right track versus losing everything that they've spent all their time and effort and education and personal recovery. Or it could be for somebody who's never been in recovery before. Maybe they've been in the field for a different reason and they got attracted to becoming an addiction counselor because they have a family member that was in recovery or something of that nature, or they just were attracted to the field. and then all of a sudden that they start to deal with some kind of mental illness or any kind of chronic illness related to substance use disorders. And so it was in 2008 is when we started. Prior to that, we had a peer assistance program that was under the Texas Association of Addiction Professionals, TAP, but it really had nothing. It couldn't really do anything. It had no legislative backing. It had not a very big outreach system. It was basically just a bunch of alcoholics and drug addicts trying to help other counselors stay sober and networking together from a mentor perspective. But we noticed a lot of people were losing their license. They leave the field, and it just happens that addiction professionals. There's always a shortage of addiction professionals, and we don't need to see that happen as we move forward in the future. And so in 2008, we put a bill together in the state legislation in Texas, and peer assistance was born out of that legislation. And we modeled this Texas Addiction Professional Peer Assistance Network after the nursing program in Texas. And a little interesting detail is at the beginning of the nurses, what they call that TAPNET, and we actually designed for the TAPNET system the entire peer assistance program for them. TAP did at the time, and as a result of it, they worked on it for about 20 to 25 years, and then they handed it back to us and said, when we got our legislation passed, they said, here's what we've improved on the program. Here it is. Thank you very much for giving it to us in the very beginning. And you guys modify it, adjust it for addiction professionals, and move forward from there. And that's how we kind of got started.
The program has been around since '08, about 14, 15 years. How many counselors have taken advantage of or entered the program, Scott?
I would say in that particular time, almost around 300 people have been enrolled into the program. In Texas, we average somewhere on a year-to-year, every 2-year cycle, about 7,000 addiction professionals. So when you look at that, 300 of them, real close there. We're a little bit over 300 right now. But that's also, we also help students too, so I don't count them in it. So that would be somebody that are fixing to come into the field, but they're not actually in the field.
Yeah, it certainly makes a lot of sense in terms of, healing the healer and getting a person well. And it also makes economic sense. I mean, you invest a lot of money in treatment counselors. And just like in typical employee assistance programs, you want to invest in the individual. If you got a piece of machinery and the machinery breaks down, you don't get rid of it because you have invested in it. You fix it. In the same way with employees, and in this case, with counselors. How does it work in terms of the person going into treatment, the assessment process, even the intervention process? Is it self-referral, or can a coworker say, look, my coworker, I think, is having some difficulty?
Normally, it starts out with a phone call, comes to an 800 number, and it could be basically a peer, it could be a coworker, it could be the individual that actually has the addiction-related disorder, or it could be an employer that's concerned about one of their employees on site at one of the treatment programs. It can be a professor at a university who's helping one of their students get into the field but notices that there's substance use disorder type of problems going on. So those are usually the normal avenues. And then also if there's some kind of license-related issue that's happened, let's say, for instance, there's an impairment issue that happens and the state of Texas has cited an individual for something, they may refer straight to our program. And so that's normally how it starts. But there are people that do what we call self-referrals. They basically identify that the problem exists with themselves, and they decide that they want to use the mentoring aspect of the peer assistance program, and they'll give us a call. So once that happens, an intake is started, basically just like you were familiar with at a treatment center, and kind of some demographic information. So we find out do they fit the criteria for the program? If they do, and there's some kind of mental health or substance use disorder going on, then we refer them to assessors, and those assessors will do an assessment and find out what the exact nature of the problem is, and then they will make a recommendation back to the peer assistance program, and then we'll move forward from there. It could involve going to treatment. It could involve going to 12-step support groups. It could involve counseling. It could be behavioral health treatment. Any of those little things could be a possible or a combination of all of the above. So it could be individual counseling. It could be all kinds of different things and recommendations from those assessors. Once a person has went through that process, when they finish and complete whatever that assessors determined, and the peer assistance program has agreed for the that recommendation, then what happens is an individual will enroll into the monitoring aspect of it. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because the monitoring piece is set up to encourage from an advocacy perspective, and so they're assigned an advocate. And then that advocate acts as kind of like a mentor, or what we're more familiar with in the recovery world of like a 12-step sponsor kind of concept.
Mm-hmm.
But they're really just a mentor that's supporting you, coaching you, trying to help you get back into the actual field itself and get back into going back to work and all that kind of stuff. And kind of like a mini EAP kind of concept, employee assistance program type thing. And depending on which one of the programs that they're enrolled in will depend on the level of intensity and monitoring. So some of the monitoring can be done with drug testing. If there's a state-related issue that's, say, like some kind of sanction or something of that nature that's coming for their license from that perspective from the state of Texas, that could involve a higher level of accountability. And so we have a system that they enroll into that system, and it monitors their progress. And that one is very similar to the one that is done by the airline pilot. And so their peer assistance program does something very similar to that. And the nursing programs and some of the medical doctors do the exact same thing. So they all modify and are very similar in the way that they're utilized. So it's non-punitive, so we try not to stay out of that. But there are some situations where somebody has a higher level of oversight, But the majority of it is volunteer basis and protecting their livelihood by their license or whatever credential that they actually have.
How soon can they go back to work? And do all of them want to go back to work?
Yeah, it's an interesting, some don't want to go back immediately. Obviously, they need some time to reestablish recovery support networks and things of that nature. But typically speaking, as soon as they're deemed what we call safe to practice, and that's after they've finished the recommendations of the assessor and the treatment outcome and recommendations of that. And once they've done that, they can go back to work, but there's certain stipulations that do happen from that perspective. An example of that would be there's no working over 40 hours a week for a period of time. And the reason they do that is to keep them from getting burnout, getting back into stress, and then finding themselves back in relapse. So there's lots of little pieces to the puzzle that you put in based off of the individual and what's going to be best for that particular counselor, addiction professional counselor.
Does the counselor take sick time or vacation time? How does that work?
If they happen to work for a private entity that has health insurance or something of that nature, and they can utilize the same aspects as the FMLA and the American Disabilities Act, can be protected from their job related to that, and go off to treatment, and they're still fit into all the other guidelines that exist for all employers currently, based on your state. Our state, in the state of Texas, obviously, they fall under those guidelines, the federal guidelines, and so they're protected in that respect. Now, they can be, if they were impaired on the job, let's say that they were under the influence at a site and they were referred to the state of Texas, that could be a situation where the employer could choose to terminate their employment at that agency. So there are situations where that comes into play, but they can't just go work somewhere else when the state has been notified of a violation of that sort if it's related to impairment. In other words, practicing on under the influence of substances on a site or something of that nature. So, there's always tricky situations where you've got to look at all the different factors, and each individual is different. So, I mean, one person may go through the process quickly and fast and be ready to go back to return to work and be approved for that. TAPNET will be the final approval of that to make sure, and then we'll monitor them even after they agreed to go back to work. And so a lot of times there's employers are involved in that process also, and so they've got their own personal policies and procedures at their company that they adhere to, and they may want to look at some of the peer assistance drug testing and that kind of thing. So I mean, all of those are different factors. There's not one person kind of treated the exact same way every single time because everybody's kind of different, but there's some general ideas that stay the same.
Are the treatment programs specifically for addiction professionals, either in Texas or other places in the country? I mean, if someone at Summer Sky had a relapse, they certainly would not go through the Summer Sky treatment program.
Right, that's correct. So, for example, there may be situations where somebody has been known in the field for a long period of time. Let's just say, for instance, myself. I've been in the field since 1998. So if I actually returned to drinking or drug usage and I needed to go to treatment, a lot of times when I contact the peer assistance program, they would actually refer me probably out of state.
Yeah.
Because everybody in the state of Texas would probably know who I am in the field.
Right.
So they would need to protect my confidentiality. So that we've worked with other treatment programs across the United States for what we call approved providers. And so any treatment center can petition the TAPNET organization to become a participating provider, and they just have to fill out some information and go through a little check system that we have put in place, and they can join and help out treating some of these addiction professionals. That's like upper management type of cases and stuff of that nature, or clinical directors and things of that nature. But since the state of Texas is such a large state, we've got providers in all areas of the state where they go to treatment at. So in other words, somebody in South Texas might, for instance, go to a treatment center in Northeast Texas, and vice versa. Somebody in West Texas may go down to the Houston area, the southern part of Southwest. So I mean, it just depends, So that's kind of how we work that, for keep the confidentiality of different professionals not coming back in, so that basically you have an experience of being a counselor, And keep this in mind too. Some treatment centers do not want to work with addiction professionals because of the difficulty, since they know all the materials and all that kind of stuff. And so we have special treatment centers that have actual professional programs. And so we refer to those programs also. In other words, they do, like the doctors and lawyers, and they specifically have what we call safety sensitive jobs. That would be the same thing as like police officers. All of those kind of go into those little specialty programs. If we can do that, obviously it all depends on private pay situation, insurance, where they have funding. All of those are factors that the peer assistance program is looking at when we make those recommendations for which one to go to, which provider to go to.
You used the word confidentiality a number of times. That really has to be the cornerstone of this program.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so important because, it's important for everybody, across the board, but it's especially really important because we're talking about their livelihood, and they need to be able to be treated just like anybody else as far as concerned with a substance use disorder. Just because they have a certain profession that they're in, addiction doesn't seem to matter, doesn't seem to care.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't seem to discriminate. Why is it that one profession over another would get an inside track to treatment and one doesn't? For many years, it was a big stigma was there for addiction professionals, and so it was very, very difficult. So a lot of people died as a result of a lot of suicide happened. A lot of people left the field, and no one knew why they left because they didn't want to be humiliated from the fact that they had been a professional helping people with addiction, and they actually happen to have their own addiction. You can look at it, since this is a chronic illness itself, or it's considered a chronic illness, it makes sense that people must maintain their personal recovery. There are times when people with long-term sobriety stop doing what they need to do to stay sober on a daily basis, and as a result of that, they find themselves back into active addiction. And when that takes place, it's devastating for everybody around them. So it's extremely important that they are afforded the opportunity to get the help they need.
Scott, what is the policy on repeated relapses? A person goes through the program, recovery renewed, go back on the job, and it happens again.
So far, that has actually happened, of course. You can go back to the program a second time and a third time. Most of those situations, there's periods of time where they maintain sobriety for at least a few years, sometimes 3 or 4 years out before we see that happening. So what I have discovered is that these addiction professionals take it pretty serious because the monitoring system itself is going to monitor them for the first 2 years. That's a lot of one-on-one time. It's a lot of talking and touching base with other addiction professionals that are helping you, case managers, advocates, things of that nature, not to mention if they're 12-step sponsors and 12-step, if they're in the 12-step program. All of those combination of people are working together, the employer and all that stuff are all on the same page. And as a result of that, you see better results because of the fact that they're engaged for 24 months worth of oversight is going on. So it makes sense that they are able to gain more sobriety and get an actual better, higher quality sobriety during that time period. If you're familiar with some of the systems like MAP, those type of programs that are happening for everyday person, some of the results that they get are better than somebody that doesn't get that doesn't have the access to those types of programs. Peer assistance is the same way. There's so much more oversight related to that with the individual that's going through the whole process, that if they're serious about staying clean and sober, then it's all laid out right before them and it's easy to access and follow through with. I mean, I'm not saying that they can't relapse, because they can, but usually accessing the services again is definitely it's an easy process. There is some cases that like the individual made a self-referral the first time, and say it was 4 years ago, they just decided to use the services that the peer assistance program has. Well, and then 6 years later, they become impaired on the job or something of that nature happens, and the state of Texas gets involved in it. Their licensing board starts to get involved, and then they refer them. The self-referral is not counted against them that very first time as far as the Texas Department of State Health Services is concerned. So that becomes basically their first time based off of licensure. So there's some of those little elements, too, that go to the situation.
The program has been in operation for nearly 15 years. Scott, in closing, can you share some stories of the good news of the recovery, of some success stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't obviously get into the specifics of the persons or individuals because they would figure it out here on today. But I can tell you that there's nothing more rewarding with seeing somebody, 6, 7, 8 years later comes back and say, hey, I don't know if you remember us, but I worked with this case manager inside of TAPNET. And, because of that, I'm still sober today, and I refer people to your program all the time, and I really appreciate everything y'all did for me. Where I was brand new in the field, I was kind of not sure if I was going to be able to maintain my recovery. I accessed the peer assistance program after a weekend relapse, and it helped me get back on track. And now I'm doing such and such degree, my PhD at such and such university, those type of things. Those are pretty neat to see people achieve success in so many different ways.
For listeners who want to find out more about TAPNET, the website is TAPNETTX for TAPNET treatment. Again, TAPNETTX.org. And I was amazed at the website because there you can download the TAPNET Participant Handbook, which has all the ins and outs of this very successful program for the past 15 years, TAPNET. And I urge you to do that. TAPNET, of course, assists counseling professionals in returning to safe practice while protecting the public and promoting professional accountability. Their vision is to promote recovery from substance use and mental health disorders for addiction counseling professionals in the state of Texas. It's non-punitive, confidential, voluntary alternative to reporting counselors to DSHS. It has been very, very successful. And these individuals can be assisted to return to full functioning with the use of peer assistance and monitoring to protect both the public and the integrity of the counseling field. Scott, thank you so much for your time. Scott Kelley, by the way, is the president of summersky.us. I urge you to check out his website because they have been successfully treating patients for, what is it now, over 35 years, Scott?
We're actually moving into our 37th year.
Oh, my goodness. 1 year at a time.
I know, right?
Yeah, and one patient at a time. I love having you on the program. You're a font of knowledge, and more than that, you're a good friend. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you, Neil.
We'll continue with Recovery Coast to Coast with some final thoughts about people, places, and things from one of America's iconic actors and a guy in long-term recovery, Dick Van Dyke. We'll do that in 30 seconds.
Alcohol is running your life. You want help, but can't take time away from work to get it. Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown M Ranch outpatient programs have helped thousands recover from addiction without losing time on the job. Nationally recognized for innovative, effective, and affordable treatment programs, Sundown M Ranch will help you put your life back on track. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
Do not depend on one thing or trust to only one resource, however preeminent. Baltasar Gracian. When we think of dependency, what usually comes to mind are addictive substances, such as alcohol and cocaine, or addictive behavior patterns, such as compulsive overeating. But there are other, less obvious kinds of dependency that can be just as destructive. What about dependency on people, places, and things? Haven't we all met someone whose self-image and actual identity depend on a job title or a particular make of car? And certainly we know how easy it is to become dependent on a partner for emotional security. If we're inclined to be overly dependent on people or things, it's usually because we feel inadequate or unsure of ourselves. But unfortunately, when we go outside of ourselves for emotional security, what we end up with is only a false sense of security that often becomes a form of bondage. And if the relationship ends or we lose the job title or exotic car, we're left feeling helpless and empty. It's less likely that we'll fall into such dependency traps if we have a strong identity and healthy self-image. But these qualities don't come automatically. We have to be willing to work for our personal security and confidence, rather than trying to get them the easy way from people, places, or things. Thought for today, dependency comes in many forms.
Well, that wraps up this edition of the National Podcast Recovery Coast to Coast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, by golly, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Let us know where you listen from. And of course, our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org, O-R-G. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's absolutely free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. You can also write a review of our ongoing podcast. Let us know, seriously, what you like and what you don't like, as we strive to make each podcast a little bit better than the last one. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And remember, if you know someone who's experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's a 24-hour national helpline that offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals available as well. That number, 1-800-622-HELP. And another shout-out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and their families, for well over 50 years. Sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to one another. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.